"What can this welder here possibly teach us? How to unclog a toilet?" Senator Richard sneered, looking down at Jackson Stone's stained clothes with utter contempt. He mistook money for ultimate power, seeing the man before him as just a ragged old man accidentally lost in the world of the elite. His laughter, along with the children's, echoed through the St. Jude classroom, viewing the trampling of the weak as a privilege of those with status. But just seconds later, the tables turned in a heartbeat. When a $50 million killing machine lost control and lunged to take his son's life, that useless old man rushed into the kill zone. With lightning-fast reflexes, he used his bare hands to stop the razor-sharp titanium blade, turning the high-tech toy into a pile of scrap metal, along with the senator's shattered arrogance. The entire auditorium fell dead silent. Turns out, he was no nobody. He was Jackson Stone, a living legend of Unit 17, a man whom even the commanding general had to bow to and respect. When the truth about the Medal of Honor was exposed, the hypocritical senator suddenly shrank, trembling and pathetically cowardly in the vast shadow of the veteran. "If you believe that true class lies not in the expensive suits we wear, but in the grime-stained hands that dare to do kind deeds and a truth that can never be buried, share this video and hit subscribe to the channel right now. Don't forget to leave a comment to share your thoughts." St. Jude International School was not merely an educational institution. It was like a miniature fashion runway for the pampered offspring of the city's highest elite. Right from the school gate, a long line of gleaming luxury cars queued up, dropping off children draped in uniforms tailored by prestigious fashion houses. The air in classroom 5A was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, the smell of wealth and privilege inherited from the cradle. In the furthest corner of the classroom, where sunlight seemed hesitant to reach, Lily Stone was trying to make herself as small as possible. The 10-year-old girl sat huddled on an oak chair, hands gripping the edge of the desk tightly, eyes glued to the floor. Under the desk, Lily was making a desperate attempt to hide her poverty. She used her old, faded backpack to block her feet, trying to cover her gaping sneakers. They were shoes her grandfather had bought from a thrift store 2 years ago. The rubber soles had peeled off, temporarily fixed by him with black duct tape, but now the tape had started to peel, revealing the frayed socks underneath. Amidst a forest of polished Italian leather shoes and limited edition sneakers of her classmates, Lily's shoes appeared like an ugly scar on the perfect face of St. Jude. Today was Career Day, the most anticipated event of the year, where rich kids had the chance to brag about their family's power and wealth. On the podium, Brad Sterling stood with the demeanor of a future politician. The 10-year-old boy, son of Senator Richard Sterling, wore a meticulously tailored suit, his gelled hair slicked back. Brad held the microphone, his clear, confident voice echoing throughout the perfectly soundproofed classroom. "My dad runs the Defense Committee," Brad declared boldly, his gaze sweeping the class with condescension. "My dad doesn't work in a normal office. He signs billion-dollar contracts and decides which tanks and planes the U.S. military gets to buy. One signature from my dad is worth 1,000 tanks combined. My dad protects this whole country with his pen." The class gasped in admiration. Applause erupted. The homeroom teacher standing beside him smiled with satisfaction, nodding approval as if it were her own achievement. Brad basked in that moment of glory, nose held high. But the boy's arrogance didn't stop there. Brad's gaze darted to the back of the class, piercing through rows of seats to pin Lily down. He smirked, a malicious sneer appearing on his immature face. "What about you, Lily?" Brad asked loudly into the microphone, deliberately letting the whole class hear. "I heard your grandpa works with metal just like my dad, right?" Lily started, face burning hot. She buried her face toward the desk, hands twisting together. She wanted to answer, wanted to say her grandfather used to be a soldier, used to be a hero, but her throat choked up. Brad didn't wait for an answer. He continued attacking with the cruel innocence of a child. "But it's welding sewer pipes, isn't it? I see him picking you up in that rusty pickup truck, looking all black and dirty. That old man probably only knows how to bang hammers on scrap metal, right? How would he know anything about billion-dollar contracts?" Giggles began spreading from the front desks, quickly turning into open mocking laughter. Lily felt her cheeks burning as if on fire. She wanted the ground to swallow her, wanted to disappear from this world instantly. Shame and anger surged within, but the inferiority complex of poverty locked her mouth shut. She remembered her grandfather picking her up every afternoon, his protective clothes stained with grease, the sour smell of sweat mixed with burnt metal. She loved him, but right now, She felt his presence was a humiliating shame. Just then, the heavy classroom door suddenly opened. The luxurious lavender-scented space of the classroom was immediately invaded brutally. A distinct acrid smell of burnt metal, pungent machine oil, and ozone from electric arcs rushed in, completely overpowering the expensive perfumes. Jackson Stone walked in. He stood there, towering like an ancient rock amidst the flow of flashy modernity. He wore a blue welder's jumpsuit faded by sun, wind, and electric sparks, the chest stained with pitch-black grease patches. His left hand held a black protective mask, cracked at the rim. His right hand carried a heavy metal toolbox. The bulky safety boots on his feet were caked with slag dust and dried mud, leaving clear, dirty tracks on the polished oak floor of the classroom. His military-cut hair had turned completely white, his rugged face with deep wrinkles etched with traces of time and battles. The class fell silent. The laughter died out. The rich kids simultaneously covered their noses, grimacing in disgust at the strange creature that had just intruded into their territory. The homeroom teacher hurried over, her heavily made-up face showing clear annoyance. She looked Jackson up and down, her gaze stopping at his filthy shoes with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Stone?" The teacher spoke up, voice shrill and demanding. "Are you mistaken? This is career day presentation for parents, not a place to fix water pipes. You entered the wrong service door for janitors, didn't you?" Jackson didn't answer the teacher. He ignored her hostile attitude the way he used to ignore bullets whistling past his ears. He stood tall, back straight as a pine tree, his calm but sharp eyes sweeping across the entire classroom. His gaze passed over the kids covering their noses, passed over Brad's smug face on the podium, and finally stopped at the back corner. He saw Lily burying her face, her small shoulders shaking as she held back tears. His presence was a discordant, jarring, and eyesore note in this symphony of fake wealth, but he didn't care. He came here for his granddaughter. Just then, from the back door of the classroom, reserved for VIP guests, a slow, sarcastic round of applause rang out, breaking the suffocating silence. The steady, cold clapping signaled the arrival of a true enemy, one Jackson had hoped never to face again in his life. The slow, sarcastic applause from the back of the classroom sounded like the drumbeats of a death sentence for Jackson Stone's self-esteem. The doors swung wide, and Senator Richard Sterling entered. His appearance instantly transformed the classroom into a one-man stage, where he was the brightest star. Richard wore an exquisitely hand-tailored charcoal gray suit that fit perfectly over a physique well-maintained at exclusive high-end gyms. He reached up to adjust the knot of his maroon silk tie, a gesture exuding the authority and smugness of a man holding the fate of thousands in his hands. Richard walked through the rows of children looking up at him in admiration, heading straight for the podium where Jackson stood. He stopped in front of the old welder, his gaze sweeping from the mud-caked boots up to the grease-stained face. That look contained extreme contempt, as if he were looking at a filthy bug that had accidentally crawled onto his luxurious banquet table. "Oh, Mr. Stone," Richard spoke up, his voice smooth but cold as a scalpel. "I didn't expect to see you here. But honestly, this clean and fragrant classroom doesn't seem to suit your grimy appearance and pungent sweat smell." He deliberately emphasized the word grimy, while waving his hand lightly in front of his nose as if to ward off an unpleasant odor radiating from the man opposite him. The whole class giggled. Brad, standing beside his father, joined in with a triumphant smile. Richard didn't stop there. He turned to the class, spreading his arms like a preacher dispensing truth. "My dear students, today is the day we talk about careers that shape the world, jobs that require intellect and macro vision to move humanity forward. Brad's father here signs laws, weapons, contracts to protect peace." He paused a beat, glancing sideways at Jackson with a smirk. "And what can this welder here teach us? How to unclog a toilet when it's backed up, or how to hammer scrap metal to earn a few pennies a day?" Richard's words were like a spark thrown into dry straw. The children, accustomed to judging people by appearance and assets, laughed in delight. The laughter was childish, but carried a terrible lethality. Brad pushed his advantage. The boy pointed at Jackson, lifting his chin and saying loudly, "My dad is right. Go home so the class doesn't stink. No one here needs plumbing fixed." Lily sat at the back of the class, tears rolling down her cheeks. She wanted to stand up to defend her grandfather, but fear and inferiority bound her to the chair. She only bowed her head, waiting for her grandfather to turn his back and leave in shame like so many times before. But Jackson Stone didn't budge. He wasn't angry. nor did he show shame. His rugged face maintained a strangely calm expression, like a calm sea before a great storm. He slowly stepped onto the podium, the sound of his safety boots hitting the wooden floor making solid sounds, more authoritative than the sound of Richard's expensive leather shoes. He placed the pitch-black, cracked welding mask onto the teacher's desk. Thud, the sharp, dry sound rang out, cutting through the children's mocking laughter. Jackson stood tall, his broad chest blocking Richard's view. He looked straight into the senator's eyes, the deep and steadfast gaze of an old soldier making Richard suddenly feel unsettled, the smile on his lips stiffening. "I don't shape the world with signatures or flowery words, Mr. Senator." Jackson's voice was deep and resonant, echoing like a bronze bell from an ancient temple, drowning out all noise in the room. "I reinforce it." The short but heavy sentence made the air in the room drop. Jackson didn't let the opponent react. He reached his calloused, rough hand covered in tiny scars into his jacket breast pocket. From within, he pulled out a strange object. It was a small piece of metal, pitch black, distorted and ugly, looking like a piece of scrap iron thrown away at a dump. He held the piece of metal high under the bright classroom lights, letting everyone see its roughness. "Do you see how ugly it is?" Jackson asked, his voice softening, but still full of power. He didn't look at Richard anymore, but looked down at the bewildered children. "It's not shiny like model tanks, nor expensive like the suits you see. It's just a black, rough piece of iron." He paused a moment, letting curiosity creep into the minds of each child, then continued in a solemn tone like taking an oath. "But 12 of this country's most elite Special Forces soldiers survived to return to their families thanks to this ugly thing. Not thanks to a signature on paper, but thanks to the endurance of this piece of metal amidst a living hell." Richard Sterling pursed his lips, intending to interrupt a story he considered fabricated and outdated. He wanted to mock Jackson for being delusional about the past. But just as he was about to speak, a majestic, heroic aura radiating from the old veteran choked him. The whole class went silent. The once noisy and arrogant children were now holding their breath, eyes wide and glued to the scrap metal in the welder's hand, waiting for the great secret behind that ordinary appearance to be revealed. The atmosphere in classroom 5A felt sucked into another dimension, one devoid of expensive perfumes or the gentle hum of air conditioning, leaving only intense focus on the darkened object in the old welder's hand. Jackson Stone gently rotated the piece of metal, calluses on his fingers brushing against its rough surface, creating soft rasping sounds that echoed in the minds of the breathless children. He didn't rush to boast like Richard bragging about contracts. He began with a stillness, the stillness of someone who had walked through the eye of a storm. "This is the main rotor retaining pin from a Black Hawk rescue helicopter," Jackson began, his voice lowering, carrying the breath of dust and gunpowder from a distant memory. "I welded it back together in the winter of 2011, amidst a blinding sandstorm in the Kandahar Valley, Afghanistan. The main engine was damaged by enemy fire, the rotor blade was loose, and the entire team of 12 was trapped in an encirclement. The sandstorm whipped our faces like knives. Visibility was zero, and the sound of insurgent machine gun fire was churning the earth right beneath our feet." He paused a beat, his gaze distant, staring into the void, as if re-seeing the chaotic scene of years past. The children, who only knew war through flashy video games, were now wide-eyed with astonishment at the nakedness of reality. Even Brad, the boy who just moments ago had joined his father in mocking him, was now craning his neck to listen, his arrogant expression gradually replaced by instinctive curiosity. There were no modern machines to help back then, no robots or artificial intelligence, just me, a portable welder running low on fuel, and these bare hands. Jackson raised his right hand, a hand full of pitted scars and soot stains. He looked straight at Brad, his eyes holding no reproach, only the solemnity of a teacher imparting a lesson on life and death. If this weld was off by even a single millimeter, or if my hand trembled from fear for even a split second, the rotor would lose balance. Upon startup, centrifugal force would fling the blade off, the helicopter would explode, and 12 soldiers, 12 fathers, husbands, would never have the chance to return home. He placed the metal piece on the table. The dry sound rang out like a heavy exclamation point. "That is my job. I don't sign papers to buy tanks. I use fire and steel to ensure the soldiers in those tanks are safe. I reinforce life from the most broken things." At the back of the class, Lily slowly lifted her head. Her eyes no longer held tears of humiliation, but instead a sparkling light of fierce pride. She looked at her grandfather's broad back, at the stained welder's suit she was once ashamed of, and suddenly realized those stains were not signs of poverty, but medals of courage. Brad sat on the podium, shoulders slightly slumped. He glanced at his father, then at the black piece of iron, a vague comparison rising in his mind about the value of practical deeds versus flowery words. But Richard Sterling was not one to easily accept losing the spotlight, especially to someone he considered lower class. He noticed the admiration in the children's eyes shifting toward Jackson, and it deeply wounded his twisted self-esteem. He needed to regain control, needed to prove that power and money were the ultimate truth. A truly touching story, probably dug out of a museum from the last century. Richard clapped, a crisp but ear-piercingly fake applause, shattering the solemn atmosphere Jackson had just built. He stepped forward, blocking Jackson with his body, flashing a perfect industrial smile. But times have changed, Mr. Stone. We live in the digital age. Now we use automated drones, satellite guidance. Your muscle power and recklessness are obsolete. No one entrusts their life to the trembling hands of a human anymore. He snapped his fingers loudly. The side door opened, and Richard's assistant hurried in, holding a large silver metal case printed with a shiny Sterling Defense logo. Richard opened the lid with the solemnity of a magician about to perform his greatest trick. Inside the shockproof foam lay a magnificent machine. It was a model of the X9 drone, with a polished titanium alloy shell, razor-sharp propellers, and a state-of-the-art sensor camera system. "This is the future," Richard declared, voice full of pride as he lifted the drone from the box. The X9 combat drone, worth $50 million per unit. It is equipped with the world's most sensitive thermal sensors, AI target recognition, and absolute precision strike capability without any human intervention. It is perfect, cold, and never knows fear or fatigue. We don't need old and dirty soldiers sacrificing themselves anymore. Just one button press, and the enemy is destroyed. The children in the class, with their innate curiosity and love for technology, were immediately captivated by the drone's flashy appearance. They gasped in delight, bright eyes staring at the modern war machine, completely forgetting the story of Jackson's rusty piece of iron. Richard watched the reaction with satisfaction. He placed the drone on the floor and flipped the start switch. The electric motors whirred to life smoothly, 4 propellers spinning up, creating a strong wind that blew papers off the teacher's desk. The X9 slowly lifted off the ground, hovering about 2 meters high in the middle of the classroom. Blue LED lights swept across the room, creating a sci-fi movie scene. "That's awesome, Dad," Brad cheered, his admiration for his father returning. "It looks just like the game I play." Richard smiled smugly, crossing his arms, enjoying the applause. He glanced at Jackson with a challenging look, as if to say, "See that, old man? This is class. You're just discarded past." Jackson Stone stood back, saying nothing. He squinted, eyes hidden behind deep wrinkles, not looking at the flashy LED lights, but focusing on the machine's movement. 10 years in the military and 20 years as a mechanic had honed his hearing sharper than a wolf's. Amidst the smooth hum of modern electric motors, his experienced ears caught a strange sound. Zuzz, zuzz, clack, a very small noise, almost invisible to ordinary people, coming from the left propeller shaft of the drone. It was the friction of metal when a rotating shaft was off-center, the cry for help of a machine being pushed beyond its limits or assembled incorrectly. Jackson frowned. He looked closely at the drone's body, observing a slight vibration hard to see with the naked eye. Blood-earned experience told him something was wrong. A $50 million killing machine was not allowed to make that sound. He was about to step up to warn them, but Richard was engrossed in presenting the drone's automated seek and destroy capabilities, completely ignoring the device's instability. "It is scanning your body heat to simulate ally recognition," Richard explained, pointing at the blue light sweeping the classroom. "As long as the light is blue, you are absolutely safe." But as Richard's words ended, that zzz sound suddenly became louder, sharper. The drone suddenly wobbled slightly in the air like a bird hit by a bullet. And then, the most horrifying thing happened. The LED lights on the drone's body, from a soothing blue, abruptly flickered and turned bright red, the red of blood, the red of the highest danger warning. The engine sound changed from a smooth hum to an ear-piercing screech, like a wild beast just escaped from its cage. Jackson realized the danger immediately. A soldier's instinct rose stronger than ever. He didn't need to think. His chest compressed, then burst out a resounding shout, drowning out the engine revving madly. Turn it off, immediately. Do you agree that modern machines can never replace human experience? Leave a comment if you stand with the veteran Jackson. Jackson Stone's shrill scream rang out through the classroom like a thunderclap signaling an approaching storm. Tearing apart the atmosphere of smugness Richard Sterling was trying to build, he rushed forward, disregarding the gap in status and the contempt the senator held for him. The veteran's seasoned eyes saw what no one else in the room could see, the Grim Reaper dancing on the spinning propellers of the killing machine. "The gyroscope is off axis," Jackson roared, his voice urgent, drowning out the engine that was beginning to whine abnormally. "The infrared sensor is overloading. It's mistaking the children's body heat for high-heat enemy targets. Turn it off immediately before it switches to auto-attack mode." But that life-or-death warning hit Richard Sterling's impenetrable wall of arrogance. To him, the words of a mud-stained welder could never compare to technical reports from his corporation's top engineers. He felt insulted that a low-class individual dared to lecture him on high-tech right in front of future voters. "Nonsense. Get back." Richard shoved Jackson hard in the chest with both hands, sending him stumbling backward. His face was beet red with rage, his eyes filled with extreme contempt. "This is $50 million technology, the pinnacle of military AI. Who the hell are you? Are you a welder or a chief engineer to dare lecture me on how to operate it?" Jackson managed to steady himself, ignoring the rough shove. He pointed at the drone, which was beginning to shake violently in the air. "It hasn't been calibrated for room temperature," he screamed, trying to explain the most basic technical principle that arrogance had caused Richard to overlook. In this enclosed environment, the contrast between body heat and ambient temperature is too high. The sensors will go haywire. But his voice was quickly swallowed. The X-9 drone suddenly let out an ear-piercing screech, a sharp sound like metal grinding against metal at maximum speed. It no longer hovered smoothly but began to lurch violently, swaying left and right, like a mad beast trying to break its chains. The downdraft from the 4 propellers blasted the desks below, sending books and papers flying, creating a scene of chaos. Brad, standing closest to the drone, was the first to sense the direct threat. The proud smile on the boy's lips vanished, replaced by sheer terror. He backed away, bumping into the edge of the teacher's desk, his face drained of all color. "Dad, what's wrong with it?" Brad asked tremblingly, his voice lost in the engine's roar. "Why is it so loud? Make it stop, Dad." Richard finally began to realize the situation was spiraling out of control. He looked at his panicked son, then at the machine spinning out of control above his head. His arrogant confidence vanished, replaced by the fumbling panic of a man used to giving orders but clueless about handling a crisis. He looked down at the controller in his hands, thumbs mashing buttons randomly, trying to find the emergency kill switch he had never bothered to read the manual for. "What the hell is this? Why won't it obey?" Richard muttered, sweat pouring down his forehead. "Stop. I order you to stop immediately." But the $50 million machine didn't care about a senator's command. It obeyed only its cold, pre-programmed algorithms. On the controller's LCD screen, lines of code scrolled wildly, then abruptly stopped. A blinking crimson notification appeared like a death sentence for everyone in the room. "Connection lost. Auto-attack mode activated." Richard froze. He stared at the words, his brain completely paralyzed. Auto-attack mode meant the drone would autonomously seek and destroy targets based on the largest heat signature it scanned. And in this air-conditioned room, the largest, closest and clearest heat sources were the living, breathing human beings right beneath it. In the air, the X-9 stopped its chaotic lurching. It paused for a beat, hovering ominously. The glowing red sensor lights swept the room once, then stopped, locking onto the target closest to it, the person whose body heat was spiking from fear. The machine swiveled its mock gun barrel toward the boy. Although the gun was a prop, the 4 razor-sharp titanium alloy propellers spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute were very real. They were flying chainsaws, ready to slice through anything in their path. The engine screeched to a high pitch, sounding like a call from the Grim Reaper echoing from hell. The drone didn't lunge straight forward. Instead, it shot up to the high ceiling, gaining momentum for a lethal dive according to its airstrike programming. From high above, it nosedived straight toward Brad's head, with the speed of a bullet. The entire class let out a horrified scream. Children covered their heads and ducked under desks, waiting for a bloody tragedy to unfold right before their eyes. The children's shrill screams seemed swallowed by the feral roar of the X-9 engine. In the moment death plunged from the ceiling with the speed of a hunting falcon, time in classroom 5A seemed to freeze. Richard Sterling, the powerful man who always prided himself on controlling every situation, now stood, rooted to the spot. His arms hung limp, the controller clattering to the floor, his eyes wide with horror as he watched the killing machine manufactured by his own company, hurtling straight toward his only son. He wanted to rush forward, wanted to shield his child, but primal fear had frozen his legs solid. But there was one person who did not hesitate. From the end of the podium, a blue blur shot past everyone's vision. It wasn't the slow, trembling movement of a 60-year-old welder, but the lightning-fast reflex of a leopard, honed through thousands of hours of life-and-death combat. Jackson Stone had activated the instincts of a Unit 17 Special Forces soldier the second the threat appeared. He didn't think, didn't calculate the cost. His body automatically lunged forward like an arrow leaving the bow. Just before the razor-sharp titanium alloy propellers could touch Brad's hair, Jackson lunged. He used his broad, sturdy back to cover the boy, pressing Brad flat against the cold wooden floor, creating an impenetrable living shield. A loud thud rang out as his body hit the floor, but Jackson ignored the pain in his bones and joints. His left hand reached out, calloused fingers like iron pincers gripping the body of the wildly spinning drone, trying to pin its head down. His right hand, with the absolute precision of a master mechanic, slipped into the narrow gap on the machine's side housing the scorching hot battery pack. Scott, the gruesome sound of metal slicing into flesh rang out dryly, chilling to the bone, making anyone who heard it shudder. One of the 4 propellers spinning at maximum speed slashed into Jackson's right bicep. The sharp titanium blade tore through the thick protective jacket like thin paper, then buried itself deep into the veteran's solid muscle. Fresh blood sprayed out, dark, red, and hot. Droplets splattered onto Richard Sterling's expensive charcoal suit, onto the pristine white wooden floor, and smeared onto the gelled hair of Brad trembling beneath. Heart-wrenching pain struck, but Jackson did not let go. He gritted his teeth, jaw muscles bulging, channeling all remaining strength into his fingers, now slippery with blood. He yanked hard. Snap. The battery pack was ripped out of the chassis, wires snapping. The roaring engine died instantly. The spinning propellers slowly came to a halt, revealing edges stained with blood. The $50 million metal monster was now just a lifeless pile of scrap metal lying still in the welder's trembling hand. The classroom sank into a deathly silence. No one dared to breathe loudly. Children slowly lifted their heads from under the desks, eyes wide with terror staring at the bloody scene before them. The homeroom teacher covered her mouth with her hand, her face drained of all blood. Jackson slowly relaxed his body. He tossed the drone's carcass aside. The metal hitting the floor sounded jarring. He braced his left hand on the ground, struggling to sit up. His right arm hung limp, blood still pouring from the deep gash, staining a patch of his blue shirt, red and dripping onto the floor to form a terrifying dark pool. Brad Sterling slowly opened his eyes. He was still lying within Jackson's protective embrace, his whole body without a single scratch. He looked up, seeing the grease-stained face of the man he had just mocked, grimacing in pain, seeing fresh red blood flowing down, covering old scars. In that moment, the arrogance of a rich heir vanished completely, leaving only the gratitude and fear of a child just saved from death. Jackson gasped for air, sweat mixed with soot running down his forehead. He looked at Brad, his eyes shining with sincere concern instead of resentment. He started to raise his uninjured left hand to reassure the boy, intending to ask if he was hurt anywhere. But before he could do that, a dark shadow rushed over. Richard Sterling had broken out of his paralysis. He saw blood splattered on his suit, saw his son lying in the arms of the dirty welder, and most importantly, he saw his expensive tech toy shattered to pieces. Wounded pride, humiliation from public failure, and fear morphed into a frenzied rage. Instead of gratitude, his eyes now held only hatred for the man who had just stolen his thunder. He rushed forward, not to thank his son's savior, but with the aggressive air of someone whose honor had been insulted to the extreme. The searing pain from the deep gash on his right bicep forced Jackson Stone to clench his jaw tight to suppress a groan. Hot blood still poured relentlessly through the fingers of his left hand, trying to stem the wound, soaking the frayed protective sleeve and dripping crimson droplets onto the polished classroom floor. He gasped for air, chest heaving after the life-or-death action. His aged but fierce eyes turned toward Brad Sterling, the child still trembling, face drained of blood from the aftershock of the terror he'd just experienced. Jackson started to reach out his uninjured hand to comfort the boy, to say everything was okay, that the metal monster was dead. But before his rough hand could touch Brad's shoulder, a rough force yanked the boy away. "Get your hands off my son!" Richard Sterling's roar rang out ear-piercingly, tearing apart the quiet atmosphere just re-established after the disaster. The senator rushed forward, face beet red with rage, eyes wild like a cornered beast. He grabbed his son by the collar of his suit, jerking him back so hard Brad stumbled and nearly fell. The boy looked up at his father with pleading eyes, hoping for a comforting hug, a caring word after narrowly escaping death. But Richard didn't even look at his son once. He didn't care if Brad was hurt, nor did he mind the child's extreme panic. His gaze was glued to the mangled pile of scrap metal at Jackson's feet. It was the corpse of the X-9 drone, his technological pride, the tool for winning votes, and the symbol of his power, now reduced to a pile of junk with severed wires and broken propellers. Richard pointed a finger trembling with rage at Jackson's face, his voice hissing with bitterness. "What the hell did you just do, you bastard? You just destroyed $50 million worth of military property. Do you know you just threw taxpayers' money out the window?" Jackson was stunned. He couldn't believe his ears. He had just risked his life, accepted bleeding to save this man's only son, and this was how he responded? Jackson stood up straight, though pain racked his body. The soldier's spirit in him still stood tall as a rock mountain. "I just saved your son's life," Jackson said, his voice gravelly but firm, eyes looking straight at the despicable man before him. "If I hadn't pulled the power, that propeller would have split the kid's skull in two. You care more about that pile of scrap than your own child's life?" The accurate strike to his dark heart made Richard pause for a split second. He glanced around. The children, the teacher, and other parents were looking at him with suspicion. He realized he was losing points. He realized his position was shaking violently before the heroic act of this poor welder. If Jackson became a hero, his political career and Sterling Corporation's reputation would collapse. He couldn't let that happen. He needed a scapegoat. He needed to turn white into black. Richard's face hardened, shifting from anger to cruel cunning. He sneered, a twisted, dangerous smile. "Saved his life? Do you think I'm stupid?" Richard shouted, deliberately raising his voice to drown out the truth, to manipulate the confused crowd's psychology. "You staged this? I saw you tinkering with the drone before I started it. You're jealous of my success, jealous because I'm rich, and you're just a ragged welder, so you secretly sabotaged it to humiliate me in front of everyone. You're lying," Jackson shouted, indignation surging. "I warned you about the gyroscope error." "Shut up," Richard cut him off, turning to the crowd, raising his hands like a victim. "Do you see? He carries sharp metal pieces. He understands machines. He is a professional saboteur. He planned to attack me and my son from the very beginning." The baseless accusation, uttered by a powerful senator, quickly shook the faith of those around. The homeroom teacher, already biased against Jackson's dirty appearance, immediately nodded vigorously, siding with the strong. The children looked at each other bewildered, starting to back away in fear from the bleeding man. Richard turned to the assistant cowering by the door, ordering decisively, "Call the police. Arrest this madman immediately. He brought a weapon into a school and intentionally destroyed high-level government property. Tell them this is an emergency threatening national security." The classroom door was pushed open violently again, but this time it wasn't a guest, but the intrusion of violence. Two large police officers in riot gear, whom Richard had secretly positioned outside to protect the VIP, immediately rushed in like unleashed hunting dogs. They didn't need to ask questions, didn't need to investigate the scene. In their eyes, the man in dirty work clothes with a bloody arm was the threat. "Get down! Get down now!" the lead officer shouted, rushing to tackle Jackson. Though an elite veteran, the deep wound and surprise prevented Jackson from resisting. He was pinned hard against the teacher's desk, his face pressed tight against the cold wood, one cheek painfully squashed. The second officer roughly wrenched his injured arm behind his back. Jackson roared in pain as the wound was aggravated, fresh blood pouring out more, staining the officer's sleeve red. But they didn't care. To them, he was just a dangerous criminal resisting arrest. Click. The cold sound of metal clashing rang out, handcuffs locked tight around the hero's wrists, stripping away his freedom and honor, right where he had just performed his most chivalrous act. At the back of the class, Lily Stone witnessed the entire horrific scene. She dropped her backpack, holding her head with both hands, screaming in despair. "Grandpa, don't arrest my grandpa. He saved Brad. Let him go." The little granddaughter's heart-rending cry echoed through the room, but it was completely powerless against the cold wall of power. The homeroom teacher held Lily tight, preventing her from running to her grandfather, muttering empty words about staying safe. Jackson lay on the table, breathing heavily. He tried to crane his neck to find his granddaughter, his eyes shining with pain not from the wound, but from the helplessness of being unable to protect her from this cruelty. Richard Sterling stepped closer. He adjusted his silk tie skewed during the scuffle, brushing invisible dust off his shoulder. He bent down, leaning close to Jackson's ear, pressed tight against the table. A sick smile of victory played on his lips. his voice whispering, quiet enough for only the two of them to hear, but poisonous as snake venom. You think I don't recognize you, Stone? 10 years, but that stubborn face of yours hasn't changed. He paused a moment to enjoy the surprise in Jackson's eyes, then continued spitting out each word. You're that crazy soldier from Unit 17, the one who dared to beat a superior into the hospital. Who do you think will believe you? A poor welder with a record of violence? Or a respectable senator? Your word isn't worth dog shit. The two officers hoisted Jackson up by his armpits. They shoved him roughly toward the door, like escorting a terrorist. Blood from his arm dripped onto the floor, drop by drop, marking the unjust path he was being forced to walk. Jackson struggled no more. He held his head high, despite his disheveled and painful appearance. As he passed Richard, he didn't bow his head to beg for mercy, nor showed fear. He turned, throwing a sharp look at his enemy. It was a look containing extreme contempt and disgust, the look of a person with great character reserved for a demon in human skin standing there, fixing his flashy appearance built on a foundation of lies. The classroom door slammed shut behind him, separating the hero from the truth, leaving only Lily's sobbing echoing behind. The heavy iron door of the interrogation room slammed shut, creating a jarring sound that echoed within the four gray concrete walls. That sound was like the lid of a coffin closing, completely isolating Jackson Stone from the outside world. The room was cold, reeking of stale cigarette smoke and the characteristic musty smell of detention centers. Light from the sole fluorescent bulb on the ceiling flickered, casting pale streaks onto the metal table, illuminating the dried blood stain on the veteran's protective sleeve. Jackson sat there, hands cuffed tight to the iron ring fixed to the table. The wound on his right bicep had been crudely bandaged with a strip of white gauze now stained red. The throbbing pain still pulsed in waves with his heartbeat, but he maintained an upright posture. His eyes were closed, silent as a stone statue, ignoring the presence of the police chief standing with crossed arms guarding the door with a menacing look. He knew who he was waiting for, and he didn't have to wait long. The sound of expensive leather shoes tapping on the cold cement floor signaled the arrival of the mastermind. Richard Sterling entered the room with the air of a boss inspecting a cattle shed. He had removed his blood-stained suit jacket, wearing only a pristine white shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal a sparkling solid gold watch. In his hand was a thick file folder. Richard circled the table, observing Jackson with fake pity mixed with contempt. He stopped opposite him, slamming the file folder onto the metal table. The sound of papers hitting the surface rang out dryly. "Sign here." Richard jerked his chin, his voice smooth but containing an absolute command. He pushed the paper toward Jackson, fingers tapping on the bold title text. "Admit to child assault, disturbing public order, and intentional destruction of government property. Then pack your bags and get the hell out of this city immediately. I'll cover for you so you don't have to sit in prison again. Consider it the last favor I grant an old comrade." Jackson slowly opened his eyes. He glanced at the paper filled with legal jargon, words meticulously drafted to turn a hero into a vile criminal. He looked up at Richard, his eyes clear, without a ripple of fear. "I will not sign lies," Jackson replied, his voice strangely deep and calm. "I didn't assault anyone. I saved your son, and I'm not going anywhere. My granddaughter needs to go to school here." Richard burst out laughing, the sound echoing shrilly in the cramped room. He leaned both hands on the table, bringing his face close to Jackson's. The smell of his expensive cologne rushed into the old man's nose, overpowering the musty scent. "You think you have a choice?" he sneered, a twisted smile full of cruelty. "You're still as naive as 10 years ago, Stone. Justice doesn't belong to the righteous. Justice belongs to the one holding the pen that writes it. And right now, that pen is in my hand." He stood up straight, pulling the latest smartphone from his pocket. His finger swiped quickly on the touchscreen. "I know your weakness, Stone. It's not your old life, but that little girl, Lily. You want her to hold her head high at school, right? Then watch this. I'll let that whole school, this whole city know that Lily's grandfather is actually a wild beast with no humanity." Richard turned the phone screen toward Jackson. A blurry, shaky video appeared. It was footage from 10 years ago, extracted from a military base security camera in Afghanistan. In the video, a younger, muscular, and enraged Jackson Stone was rushing to attack another officer. He punched the man repeatedly in the face, threw him to the floor, and strangled him with a frenzied expression. The man being beaten was none other than a young Richard Sterling. The video lasted only 15 seconds. It started right when Jackson threw the first punch and ended when military police rushed in to drag him away. It had absolutely no sound, and more importantly, It completely lacked the preceding context. Viewers only saw a soldier madly attacking a superior brutally for no apparent reason. "Look familiar?" Richard asked, his voice full of smugness, seeing Jackson's eyes glued to the screen. "This is the evidence that sent you to military prison 10 years ago, stripped you of all titles, and turned you into a convict. I still keep it in my personal archive, not for nostalgia, but to remind myself of your potential insanity." He pulled the phone back, turned off the screen, leaving the afterimage of violence hanging in the air. "If I post this on social media, send it to the St. Jude Parents Association, what do you think will happen?" Richard leaned close to Jackson's ear, whispering a threat. "Your grandchild will be isolated. She will be shunned by friends, pointed at by people as the granddaughter of a violent criminal, a mentally unstable man who almost killed a respected senator. She will never be able to lift her head up. Her future will be ruined, exactly like your life." The cruel threat hit Jackson's greatest fear. Richard knew well he didn't fear prison or beatings, but he feared hurt coming to Lily. He was using an innocent child as a hostage to force him to bow in submission. The police chief at the door also smirked, seemingly too accustomed to his friend's dirty, manipulative dramas. But Richard had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated his opponent. He forgot that the man sitting before him was not just a gentle grandfather, but a warrior who had survived the most terrible hells on earth. Jackson showed no fear or panic as Richard expected. On the contrary, the corner of his mouth slowly curled up. A faint, mysterious smile containing pity for the man opposite appeared on his rugged face. That smile was completely contrary to his current imprisoned situation. It exuded a cold confidence that made Richard suddenly feel a chill down his spine. "You still kept that tape, Lieutenant Sterling?" Jackson asked, deliberately using the old military rank to address him, stripping away the flashy senator title. "You consider it a treasure, the ultimate weapon to control me all these years, right?" He paused a beat, sharp eyes drilling deep into Richard's dark soul. "Pity you only kept half, and you built your entire career based on that lying half-truth." Richard frowned, the triumphant smile on his lips vanishing. He felt the change in the atmosphere. Jackson's confidence wasn't the recklessness of a desperate man, but the certainty of someone holding a trump card. He took a step back, confusion beginning to creep into his voice. "What do you mean? What nonsense are you spouting?" Jackson leaned forward, the handcuffs clinking against the metal table jarringly, sounding like a rifle loading. He looked straight into the enemy's eyes, voice low but resonant like a pronouncement of judgment. "You think you erased all the corridor cameras that day after sending me to prison? You think your father-in-law's power whitewashed every trace of the crime you committed against Ensign Sarah? Big mistake, Richard. You erased the server hard drive, but you forgot that there are soldiers who never abandon a comrade, and the truth always has a way to survive, even if buried under 10 years of ashes." The air in the interrogation room seemed to be sucked dry by the extreme tension enveloping the two men. Jackson Stone sat there, his posture as solid as an ancient tree that had taken root through countless storms, a stark contrast to the wavering beginning to creep into Richard Sterling's eyes. The old veteran leaned forward, letting the pale fluorescent light illuminate the fierceness in his eyes, as he began to peel back layers of truth buried under dust and power. "I didn't hit you without cause," Jackson said, his voice ice-cold and echoing in the sealed room, piercing through the senator's hypocritical shell. "You edited that video very skillfully, Richard. You showed people my fist, but you hid the reason that fist was thrown. I hit you because of what you did to Ensign Sarah exactly 5 seconds prior." The name Sarah rang out like a thunderclap in a clear sky, striking straight at the fatal point in Richard's memory. He shuddered momentarily, pupils contracting instinctively. The image of the young female soldier with a blood-covered face years ago returned vividly to his mind. But very quickly, the self-defense mechanism of a liar kicked in. Richard regained his usual brazen demeanor. He sneered with contempt, trying to cover the rising insecurity within him. "Sarah?" he sneered. "That bitch disappeared from the military 10 years ago. Now she's just a cripple, a nameless nobody hiding in some corner. Who do you think will believe the accusations of a cripple against a sitting senator? Her words aren't worth the paper they're written on." But Richard's blind confidence was exactly what Jackson was waiting for. He looked straight into Richard's eyes, a look containing pity for a drowning man who still thought he was standing at the peak of glory. "It's true that Sarah couldn't stand in court to testify against you then, because you and your family used money to silence everyone. But you forgot that Sarah was Unit 17's finest communications officer. She knew you would try to erase the traces. So, right before you kicked her out, Sarah managed to copy all the data from the security camera server onto an encrypted black card. Jackson paused a beat, observing Richard's changing complexion, then delivered the final blow. It contains the original, Richard, the master copy with full audio and video, clearly recording you, forcing her to sign falsified weapons records and your brutal kick to her face when she refused. Bam! Richard slammed both hands down on the metal table, the jarring sound making even the police chief at the door jump. His face was beet red, blue veins popping on his neck from anger and panic. "You're lying," he roared, spittle flying. "I personally destroyed the original hard drive. I had it smashed and burned every backup in the server room. There is no way anything remains. You're making this up to scare me." Jackson remained calm, leaning back in his chair. His composure only highlighted Richard's loss of control. He shook his head slightly, his voice deep and steady like a father lecturing a spoiled child. "The truth is like an oil spill, Lieutenant. The more you try to push it underwater, the more you try to bury it deep, the more brilliantly it rises to the surface. You destroyed the hardware, but you couldn't destroy the conscience of true soldiers. Sarah has kept that card for 10 years, waiting for this very day to demand justice." Richard stood panting, his chest heaving violently. He wanted to strangle Jackson, to silence him forever, but reason told him that doing so right in the police station was suicide. Doubt began to gnaw at his mind. Was it true? Did that bitch really keep evidence? He began to feel the foundation of power beneath his feet shaking. The police chief, who had been silently observing, realized the situation was becoming unfavorable for his powerful friend. He stepped forward, glanced at his watch, and cleared his throat. "Senator, the honoring ceremony at St. Jude is about to begin. You are the keynote speaker. The media and voters are waiting. We shouldn't waste any more time here. Leave this madman here. I'll deal with him later." The reminder was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Richard grabbed it to escape this suffocating, high-pressure room. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He stood up straight, adjusted his suit jacket, and smoothed his hair to regain his dignified appearance. He convinced himself that Jackson was just bluffing, playing the psychological games of a desperate man. "You're just bluffing, Stone," Richard said, trying to sound tough, but his voice still held a tremor. "If you had evidence, you would have released it 10 years ago. Sit here and rot. Wait until I finish at the school. I'll come back and throw you in a mental asylum forever." Having said that, Richard turned and walked quickly toward the door. He wanted to get out of there as fast as possible, to escape the soul-piercing gaze of the old veteran. But when his hand touched the cold doorknob, his fingers trembled violently. He had to use both hands just to turn the latch. Invisible fear clung to him, haunting him even as he stepped out into the light. The door closed, leaving Jackson sitting alone in the quiet darkness of the cell. But he didn't feel lonely. In that darkness, the old welder's eyes shone like two torches. He didn't look at the lifeless wall but looked through it, toward the future where justice was about to be served. "It's time for the curtain call, Richard," Jackson muttered to himself, the corner of his lips curling into a victor's smile. At the same time, at the St. Jude International School courtyard, the sirens of an escort convoy wailed. A pitch-black armored vehicle bearing special military plates slowly entered the gate and stopped right in front of the main hall. The door opened, and a pair of polished combat boots stepped out, followed by the imposing presence of General Harrison, the supreme commander of the military. He adjusted his uniform, looking up at the banner welcoming Senator Sterling with sharp, cold eyes, signaling a massive storm about to sweep away the lies at this place. The grand auditorium of St. Jude International School was as magnificent as any national opera house. Thousands of crystal lights from giant chandeliers suspended from the soaring ceiling emitted a warm golden glow, enveloping the luxurious space below. The rows of crimson velvet seats were packed. There were powerful parents, wealthy donors, and the media pointing dozens of camera lenses at the center stage. The air was filled with expensive perfume blended with the scent of success and power. On the podium, decorated with fresh flowers and flags, Senator Richard Sterling stood like a god. He had completely shed the aggressive and rude demeanor from the police station. Now, before the public eye, he was the embodiment of politeness, dignity, and intellect. He wore a perfect navy blue suit, his hair meticulously groomed without a single strand out of place, a radiant and persuasive smile on his lips. He gripped the microphone with both hands, his warm, inspiring voice echoing throughout the hall, seeping into the minds of every listener. "Ladies and gentlemen, dear parents and students," Richard said, his gaze sweeping the crowd, pausing at the camera lenses to ensure he was captured at his best angle. "Throughout my political career, I have always held one belief. True strength does not lie in muscles, but in protection. I have always fought tirelessly for gender equality in the military. I believe that women, our mothers, sisters, and daughters, deserve absolute respect and protection, wherever they are, from the fierce battlefield to everyday life. The entire hall erupted in thunderous applause. Cheers rang out, praising the senator's progressive and humane ideology. Richard bowed humbly, accepting the admiration as a matter of course. In the front row, reserved for elite students, Brad Sterling sat straight-backed, his face beaming with pride. The boy looked at his father on stage with absolute adoration, completely forgetting that his dad had just abandoned him in a panic to worry about a broken drone. In Brad's naive mind, his dad was the greatest person in the world. In stark contrast to that joyous scene, in the darkest corner of the hall, Lily Stone sat huddled in her chair. She buried her face, small shoulders shaking violently. Lily's eyes were red and puffy from crying. She didn't hear Richard's flowery words. In her head, there was only the image of her old, grease-stained grandfather being handcuffed and dragged away like a criminal. Helplessness and fear enveloped her, making her feel tiny and alone in this glittering but cold world. Richard continued his speech, his voice reaching a crescendo, full of emotion. We must eliminate violence. We must become a shield for the weak. That is why bang! The massive oak doors at the main entrance of the hall were suddenly thrown open with extreme force, creating a terrifying sound like a gunshot, cutting off the lie flowing from Richard's lips. Blinding sunlight from outside flooded in, creating a dazzling beam of white light cutting through the dim space of the hall, forcing everyone to squint. Wind rushed in powerfully, stirring the heavy velvet curtains. The entire auditorium fell silent, hundreds of heads turning simultaneously toward the door. From within that beam of light, a figure appeared. No, two figures. General Harrison entered first. He wore the Marine Corps winter dress blue uniform, 4 stars glittering authoritatively on his shoulders. His chest was covered with brilliant medals of valor, each a testament to true courage and sacrifice. The sound of his combat boots striking the granite floor created solid, steely sounds, making the space seem compressed by the invisible pressure radiating from the supreme commander of the military. His majesty made the whole room hold its breath. Even the most arrogant guests had to stand up respectfully or bow their heads, but everyone's attention quickly shifted to the person beside him. It was a woman sitting in a modern electric wheelchair. She wore an old but neatly pressed officer's uniform. Her hair was tied back neatly in a bun, but what made everyone, from children to adults, stunned and terrified, was her face. That face was riddled with pitted scars, the aftermath of multiple complex reconstructive surgeries to repair shattered bone structures. Her nose was crooked, her left cheekbone marked by a long scar running down to her chin, deforming both her smile and her gaze. Yet, her eyes still burned with a fierce flame of resilience, the flame of someone who had walked through hell and returned to collect a debt. Richard Sterling stood on the high podium, microphone still in hand, mouth open to say the phrase, "Protect the weak," suddenly choked as if strangled. He froze on the spot. The blood in his body seemed to freeze. He recognized that woman. Even though her face was deformed, even though 10 years had passed, he could never forget those eyes. The eyes that had looked at him with hatred before he delivered that fateful kick. Ensign Sarah, the ghost of the past he thought buried forever under layers of money and power, had resurrected and was present right before him, in broad daylight, witnessed by thousands. Panic began to invade Richard's mind. He tried to stay calm, trying to cling to the last lifeline of sophistry. He told himself this could be a coincidence, or the general just happened to bring a disabled veteran to the ceremony. He forced a crooked smile, sweat starting to bead on his forehead, washing away his perfect makeup foundation. General Harrison? Richard stammered into the mic, his voice trembling, completely losing his earlier grandeur. Your arrival is a surprise. Did you come to award me another Medal of Honor for my contributions to the military? Richard's naive and delusional question rang out in the deathly silence of the hall, only highlighting his ridiculousness. General Harrison didn't answer. He didn't even bother to look at Richard once. His contempt for the man on the podium was so great he didn't want to waste a single word. He stopped in the middle of the main aisle, standing solemnly like a monument to justice. He slowly raised his right hand, giving a decisive signal toward the technical booth at the back of the hall, where his military intelligence soldiers had silently taken over before the ceremony began. On the podium, Richard felt a cold chill run down his spine. He turned his head to look at the giant projection screen behind him, which was displaying his brilliant campaign logo. Zzzt! Zzz. Ear-piercing static rang out from the high-power speaker system, making everyone cover their ears. The giant LED screen suddenly flickered continuously. Richard's logo image distorted, twisted, then vanished into a screen of squiggly black and white static. The hall's lighting system cut out, leaving only the cold light emitting from the large screen. The entire auditorium was plunged into darkness and extreme confusion. Murmurs began to rise. Then suddenly, the screen lit up brightly again. But this time, it didn't show flashy commercials or empty promises. It showed a security surveillance video with razor-sharp image quality, completely different from the blurry video Richard had used to threaten Jackson in the interrogation room. The top right corner of the screen displayed a green timestamp, the numbers dancing backward into the past. Date, the 12th of October 2014. Time, 14 hours 30 minutes and 15 seconds. Location, Corridor Zone A, Unit 17 Barracks. Richard Sterling stood, rooted to the podium, eyes wide with horror, staring at those words. He knew what was about to happen. He wanted to scream, wanted to order the screen turned off, but his throat was dry and voiceless. He was like a death row inmate standing before the gallows, helplessly watching the noose slowly tighten around his neck. Do you hate hypocrites who speak kind words but do evil deeds behind backs? If you want Richard exposed immediately, hit like and share this video. The giant LED screen behind the stage, which just minutes ago had projected the senator's flashy campaign slogans, now transformed into a mirror reflecting a naked, sinful past. The image quality from the original data on the black card was terrifyingly sharp, recreating even the dust particles floating in the air of the barracks hallway from years ago. There were no cuts, no blurring to conceal anything. The truth appeared vividly, as if happening right before the eyes of thousands of viewers. In the video, a younger Richard Sterling, his face retaining the same arrogance and cruelty, was cornering a female soldier into a dead end. It was Ensign Sarah. The young woman with determined eyes was trying to clutch a file folder to her chest, her slender back pressed tight against the cold wall with no way out. Richard stood blocking her path, his left hand braced against the wall to cut off her escape, his right hand pointing straight at her face with aggressive intimidation. The auditorium's surround sound system, originally designed to glorify the speaker's voice, now became the most formidable tool of accusation. Richard's shouting in the video rang out clearly, tearing through the silence of the auditorium. Sign these falsified weapons records immediately. If you don't, I will destroy your career. Who do you think you are to defy me? I can turn you into a traitor with just one phone call. The authoritative and threatening voice of the young Richard echoed, perfectly matching the timbre of the man currently frozen on the podium. In the video, Sarah, though frightened, still held her head high, her eyes burning with indignation as she looked straight at the abuser of power. I will not aid and abet corruption, Lieutenant. Those guns are the lives of our comrades. I would rather be kicked out of the service than be your lapdog. Sarah's steely refusal was the straw that broke the camel's back for a man accustomed to bullying. Her rejection struck directly at Richard's ego and dark ambition. In a split second, his face contorted with rage. He didn't slap her with his hand like a common scuffle. He took a step back to gain momentum and delivered a brutal kick. It was a kick with a hard-soled combat boot, delivered with the full force of a combat-trained adult male, aimed straight at the face of a defenseless woman. Thud! The jarring sound of impact rang out from the speakers, making listeners shudder. Sarah's head slammed against the concrete wall behind her with terrifying force. Fresh blood from her nose and mouth splattered onto the stark white wall, forming a haunting crimson streak. Her young body slid to the ground, collapsing unconscious instantly, her hair falling to cover a face already deformed by the vicious kick. Oh my God! Screams rang out simultaneously from the audience. The entire auditorium seemed to break. Respectable parents, who had just applauded Richard's speech on protecting women, were now utterly horrified. Mothers hurriedly covered their children's eyes, not wanting them to witness such naked and savage violence. Murmurs of outrage began to rise like a broken beehive. Brad Sterling sat in the front row, jaw dropped, looking up at the screen. He couldn't believe his eyes. Was the man kicking a defenseless woman in the face really his dad, the great hero in his heart? The image crumbled, leaving the boy stunned, tears welling up from fear and shame. But the video didn't stop there. Richard, after taking Sarah down, wasn't satisfied. He madly rushed forward, raising his leg to deliver another follow-up kick to his comrade lying motionless on the ground. His cruelty had crossed the line of humanity. Just then, a massive figure rushed into the frame like a hurricane. It was Jackson Stone, a younger Jackson, muscular and valiant in uniform, did not hesitate to rush in and shield Sarah from Richard. He didn't attack first. He used his own back to absorb Richard's next follow-up kick. The kick was so strong it made Jackson stumble, but he didn't fall. The fury of witnessing a comrade being abused turned him into a true beast. Jackson turned, grabbed Richard by the collar, and slammed him to the floor with a decisive judo throw. He pinned him down, raising a fist. "You dare hit a woman? Are you an officer or an animal, Sterling?" Jackson's roar in the video rang out with tragic indignation. He punched Richard to control his madness, to protect the unconscious woman behind him. The truth was fully exposed. Jackson Stone was not the deranged lunatic attacking a superior for no reason, as per the edited video, Richard claimed. He was a hero, a living shield who had sacrificed himself to stop a murderer. The video ended. The screen went black. The auditorium lights simultaneously blazed on, dispelling the darkness but unable to dispel the horrifying truth just revealed. The blinding light shone straight on Richard Sterling, standing lonely on the podium. The senator's face was drained of every drop of blood. Cold sweat poured like a bath, soaking his expensive shirt underneath. He stood there, microphone still in hand, but his hands trembled uncontrollably. He looked down at the crowd, searching for a sympathetic look, a defense, but his answer was a deathly, terrifying silence. Hundreds of pairs of eyes from below were staring at him. No more admiration, no more respect. In their eyes now, he was no longer a flashy politician. He was revealed in his true form, a hypocritical monster, a vile abuser who had built a career on the pain and blood of others. Disgust and outrage enveloped the space, turning the magnificent hall into a court of conscience from which Richard could not escape. The silence that enveloped the vast auditorium was so heavy that even a heartbeat could become a deafening sound. Richard Sterling stood on the high podium, the stage lights now no longer a halo of glory but like X-rays illuminating the depths of his dark soul. Thousands of eyes poured onto him, waiting for an explanation, but all they received was the panic of a sinner in his death throes. Richard gripped the microphone tight, his hands shaking so violently they created annoying thuds through the speakers. He darted his eyes around, desperately looking for an escape. The survival instinct of a political animal rose. He decided to cling to the last lifeline: denial. "It's a fake video. It's a deep fake," Richard screamed, his voice cracking, shrill and distorted. He pointed at the black screen behind him with extreme agitation. "Technology now can fake anything. They want to smear me. This is a dirty political plot to bring down my reputation before the election. Don't believe those fabricated images." But his pathetic attempt at salvation was immediately crushed by a voice more powerful than rolling thunder. "Shut your mouth, Sterling," General Harrison shouted. He didn't need a microphone, but the resonant voice of a battlefield commander seasoned by bombs and bullets was enough to shake the entire auditorium. He took a step forward, blocking Richard like an insurmountable wall of justice. "Don't insult the intelligence of everyone here any longer. This is not a deepfake or a product of artificial intelligence. This is the original footage extracted directly from the highest-level military data files, encrypted and protected by the United States government." The general's assertion was like a hammer driving nails into Richard's political coffin. His jaw dropped, speechless. Just then, the whirring motor of an electric wheelchair rang out, drawing everyone's attention. The woman in the wheelchair, Ensign Sarah, slowly rolled up to the foot of the stage podium. She stopped, looking up at the enemy who had ruined her life 10 years ago. Her hand, though crisscrossed with burn scars from a secondary explosion in the past, steadily reached up to remove the thin silk scarf, loosely covering half her face. When the scarf fell, the entire auditorium gasped in unison. Sarah's face was revealed under the bright ceiling lights. It was a map of pain. Her left jawbone was completely misaligned. Pitted scars ran from her temple down to her chin, pulling one eye downward. The brutal kick from years ago had not only shattered her facial bones but left permanent sequelae that no cosmetic surgery could erase. Her legs were covered by a thin blanket, but everyone understood that beneath that fabric was permanent paralysis from spinal damage when she fell and hit her head against the wall. "It's time to pay the debt, Sterling," Sarah's voice rang out, neither trembling nor fearful, but steely and sharp as a knife. She looked straight into Richard's eyes, her gaze burning his soul. "That kick of yours took away my beautiful face. It took away my legs, stripped me of my dream to run and serve on the battlefield." She paused a beat, pointing her index finger straight at the man trembling on the podium. "But it will never take away the honor of my savior ever again. You slandered the man who saved my life to cover up your crime. Today, that debt must be paid in full. As soon as Sarah's declaration ended, the main doors of the hall opened once more. From within the blinding light, a man walked in. No longer the grease-stained welder in ragged protective gear. No longer the rugged old man handcuffed and dragged away in shame. Jackson Stone entered with the posture of a god of war. He wore the most prestigious dress blues uniform of the United States Marine Corps. The midnight blue coat hugged his muscular chest, bright gold buttons running down the front. On his shoulders, rank insignias sparkled, reflecting the lights. But what attracted every gaze most was the blue ribbon with white stars worn solemnly around his neck. The Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for conspicuous gallantry. He walked proudly between the rows of audience seats, his combat boots striking the floor steadily, powerfully. Those who had just pinched their noses in disdain at him now simultaneously stood up, bowing their heads respectfully to make way for the true hero. Lily Stone stood up, eyes wide in amazement, then bursting with extreme pride. She wanted to run to hug her grandfather, but knew this moment was for justice. Richard Sterling saw Jackson, and his knees suddenly went weak. The image of his old comrade in glorious uniform was like a vivid nightmare rushing in to strangle him. "You," Richard stammered, backing away unconsciously, his foot catching on a tangled speaker wire on the stage floor. He stumbled, nearly falling flat on his face, his pathetic appearance a complete contrast to his initial dignified demeanor. General Harrison gave him no further chance to act. He raised his hand, ordering decisively, "Military police, arrest him." Two large MPs, fully armed, immediately rushed in from the wings. They stormed the podium, grabbed Richard's arms, and wrenched them behind his back professionally and roughly, exactly the way he had ordered done to Jackson. Click! The cold sound of handcuffs rang out, locking tight the manicured hands accustomed to signing billion-dollar contracts. Richard was pinned to the wooden floor, face pressed against the sole of an MP's boot. "Let me go! You can't do this!" Richard screamed madly as he was hauled to his feet. He struggled like a pig being slaughtered, completely losing his humanity. "I am a senator. I have diplomatic immunity. I will sue all of you in military court." In utter despair, Richard turned his head, bloodshot eyes searching for salvation. He saw Brad, the son he always considered a tool to polish his reputation, standing in the front row. "Brad, son, call a lawyer for Daddy. Tell them I'm innocent," Richard screamed. But Brad Sterling didn't move a muscle. The boy looked at his father being handcuffed and dragged away, looked at the violent video still paused on the screen, then looked over at Jackson Stone, the man with the wound on his arm standing solemnly saluting the flag. Brad slowly lowered his head. He turned his back, rotating his body completely away, refusing to look into his father's eyes. The 10-year-old child's act of turning away was the most painful, most cruel sentence for Richard. In extreme shame, the boy chose to stand on the side of truth, leaving his guilty father to sink gradually into the darkness of punishment. As the doors closed behind Richard, the vast auditorium of St. Jude International School erupted in thunderous applause. That applause was no longer for empty promises or fake political power. It was for the truth, for courage, and for the man standing solemnly on the stage. Parents, teachers, and children alike stood up, casting admiring gazes toward Jackson Stone. The old veteran nodded slightly in return, his eyes locking with Ensign Sarah's. Two old soldiers exchanged a look of understanding, shared only by those who have walked through storms together to find the light of justice. The next morning, brilliant autumn sunlight bathed the gates of St. Jude in gold. Jackson Stone took Lily to school as he did every day. He had taken off the glorious dress blues and put the Medal of Honor back into its velvet box. He returned to being himself, a humble welder in his faded blue protective gear and familiar soot-stained boots. But this time, the atmosphere around him had completely changed. No one held their nose or grimaced as he passed. Luxury cars stopped, and parents in expensive suits stepped out, bowing respectfully when they met his eyes. "Hello, Mr. Stone," a bank executive spoke up, his tone holding sincere respect for the great character hidden behind the rugged exterior. Jackson smiled in return, a gentle smile that brightened his weather-beaten face. Near the school gate, a small figure was waiting. It was Brad Sterling. The boy no longer had the arrogant, groomed look of the previous day. His eyes were puffy and red, signs of a long night of crying and torment. Seeing Jackson and Lily approach, Brad hesitated a moment before running over. He hung his head, looking down at his shoes, hands twisting together in embarrassment. "I'm sorry," Brad mumbled, his voice trembling on the verge of tears. "I'm sorry for everything, for what I said, and for what my dad did." Jackson showed no anger or reproach. He stepped forward, placing his large, calloused, and warm hand on Brad's shoulder, imparting a steady comfort to the boy. "You aren't responsible for your father's actions, young man," Jackson said, his voice deep and forgiving. "Everyone is responsible for their own deeds. You have your own path. Choose to be a better man than him. That is the best way for you to fix every mistake." Brad looked up at him, tears rolling down his cheeks, then nodded vigorously before sprinting into the schoolyard. Lily held her grandfather's hand tight, head held high with pride as she watched Brad go. Suddenly remembering something, she tugged lightly on his hand. "Grandpa," Lily asked, her clear eyes looking at him. "Yesterday in the video, they said you used violence. Teacher says violence is bad." Jackson stopped. He slowly knelt on one knee on the pavement, bringing his eyes level with his granddaughter's. He looked deep into those innocent eyes, smiling gently as he stroked her hair. "Violence is when you use strength to harm the weak, to trample on others, the way he kicked Miss Sarah, sweetheart," he explained softly. "That is the act of a coward." He raised his calloused hand, curling it gently into a fist. "But when you use this fist to protect comrades, to shield the innocent, and defend what is right, that is not violence. That is called strength." Lily nodded, a radiant smile blossoming on her lips. Grandfather and granddaughter stood up, walking hand in hand, into the sun-drenched schoolyard. The shadow of the old welder stretched long on the ground, large, steady, and encompassing the small figure of the child, like a majestic mountain eternally shielding a sapling from the storms of life. There are stories that do not end the moment the villain is handcuffed. They only truly close when the truth is preserved intact, never to be distorted or buried again. Jackson Stone did not become a hero because he was stronger than his enemy or because he won through violence. He was simply an old soldier who chose to stand tall for what was right, when every threat forced him to bow his head and admit guilt. A seemingly instinctive act to save a life. A tiny memory card guarded for 10 years, these were enough to drag the naked truth into the light and cause a seemingly invincible monument of hypocrisy to crumble into dust. If you have ever been looked down upon simply for your grease-stained clothes, or underestimated because of a rugged appearance or humble background, then this story belongs not just to Jackson, it is a reflection of you somewhere in this life. Justice may be late, but it must arrive. Do you believe in happy endings for kind people? Share this story if it touched your heart. Hit follow and subscribe right now so you won't miss our next journeys.